Eminence, ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, a warm welcome to our ecumenical conference on the joint statement on migration, also in the name of the co-organizers, the Church's Commission for Migrants in Europe, and obviously the German Bishops' Conference. Thank you very much for your interest, despite strikes in Belgium today, waves of, I don't know, the flu touching Brussels and other obstacles. Unfortunately, I have to announce that the Protestant Bishop Stefan also had to cancel his participation this morning, very on short notice due to illness. We send the best wishes to him for a quick recovery and have adopted our program accordingly. The joint statement was presented, if I'm not mistaken, at a conference in Berlin last December. And we felt that the first anniversary of this presentation was a good moment to feature this document also here in Brussels. In the meantime, it has also been translated into English, and please feel free to take a copy. There's also a summary now available in German and English. In times where the brutal war against Ukraine is ongoing and the numbers of those trying to reach the European Union by land or sea are increasing, the topic of asylum and migration remains contentious and challenging on the political level. The new governments in Italy, but also in Sweden, already announced to take a stricter approach to migration, and it seems that asylum policy is again more dividing than unifying in the European Union. Nevertheless, the generous reception of Ukrainian refugees by finally unanimously activating the Temporary Protection Directive has proven that a different approach to asylum is possible, allowing for quick access to education, health services and the labour market. With our conference today, we not only want to present the joint statement to you and the different activities of churches and faith-based NGOs, but we also want to highlight the importance of ecumenical cooperation on national but also on EU level. I'm therefore very happy to see some of our ecumenical partners also here today, like Eurodiaconia, but also Commissy. A warm welcome. Finally, given the ongoing debate in the European Parliament and the EU Council on the new pact on migration and asylum, we also want to underline the relevance of our ecumenical work for EU policy making. The question how migration to and in Europe can be shaped in a humane manner is definitely one of the major challenges of our days, and we as churches want to contribute to sound and sustainable solutions. I'm therefore very glad to welcome among us today the Migration Bishop of the Catholic Church in Germany, as well as all other panelists. Before we start, just some little practical information that you're not surprised. We record this debate for our YouTube channel, so you won't be recorded, but the panelists for those who cannot be with us today. Now I very much look forward to an interesting exchange and give the floor to Archbishop Dr. Stefan Heße for his presentation of the joint statement. Please.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Hatzinger. Ladies and gentlemen, in October 2021, almost 25 years after the publication of the first joint migration statement, the Catholic German Bishops' Conference and the Protestant Church in Germany, EKD, in cooperation with the Council of Christian Churches in Germany, ACK, presented a new ecumenical document, Shaping Migration in a Human Manner. You have examples at the entrance. In July 2022, an English translation was published as well. A summary of the statement is available both in German and in English. I'm very pleased that today we have the opportunity to engage in an exchange about the contents of this document. It is more than suitable that we do this here in Brussels, the seat of several EU institutions. For when it comes to achieving a human migration and asylum policy, the European level has become at least as important as the national level. When the churches in Germany published their first joint migration statement in 1997, the focus was on different issues than it is today. For a long time, the claim that Germany is not a country of immigration prevented a realistic migration policy. Urgent questions of integration were largely ignored. The so-called asylum compromise led to a serious restriction of the right of asylum enshrined in Germany's basic law. And the European level was not nearly as significant in migration and asylum policy as it is in our days. With their new migration statement, the churches take into account the developments of the last decades. They aim at taking a different look at the complex reality of migration from the perspective of various disciplines, theology, history, social and economic sciences, as well as from the perspective of practical experiences in church and society. The document was developed in a broad participatory process. The German Bishops' Conference and the Protestant Church in Germany formed an interdisciplinary working group, which I had the privilege for chairing together with Präses Manfred Rekowski. Within the working group, smaller ecumenical teams were formed to deal with the various issues. The draft texts produced in this way were then submitted to experts from the fields of practical migration work and to an external academic feed group for critical reading. In addition, consultations took place at the different levels of church life in Germany. Not only the Catholic and Protestant churches were involved, but also the other Christian denominations. The migration statement intends to provide orientation and guidance. The questions connecting the different topic is: how can we shape migration under imperfect and contradictory conditions in ways that do justice to human dignity? In their preface, Bishop Georg Betzing and also Bishop Heinrich Bedford-Strom and Archbishop Radu Konstantin Mirum described the approach of the document as follows. The publication is made with the awareness that the churches themselves have a long history of dealing with migration. In doing so, we continue to be learners. We are learning anew how the Holy Scripture can be read and understood as a book of migration, how interculturality is lived in the everyday life of church, how living together in diversity can succeed, and how the long-standing plurality can be valued in a new way. At the same time, the churches must learn to cope with the task ahead under changed conditions. That migrants are given their rights, that discrimination and racism are overcome, that binding basic values, which are particularly needed in a plural society, are protected and strengthened, that peace and justice grow and creation is preserved in German and worldwide. Allow me to make a closer look at some parts of this migration statement. As the document is over 200 pages long, my outline does not aim to be exhaustive, but to give you a first impression and to invite you to read the document yourself in a critical and fruitful manner. The introduction to the migration statement is followed by a chapter that is already programmatic in its title, Living in a Migration Society, Chapter 2. It outlines how Germany has come to understand itself as a diverse migration society and identifies some significant political milestones along the way. More recent experiences are also discussed, particularly in the way of the refugee movement of 2015 and 16, a great willingness to get actively involved in welcoming people who seek protection arose, with church and civil society playing a crucial role. However, controversial, sometimes even polemical debates on migration issues occur again and again. The chapter describes that public debates in this context are often related to areas of social cohesion, security, and economical and welfare. To draw the necessary distinctions, a constructive culture of debate is needed. This chapter is succeeded by reflections on history and psychology of religion. Church shaped by migration. How are different churches and faith communities characterized by migration, and what does this mean for their pastoral ministry? Since its inception, Christian faith has crossed linguistic, cultural, and political borders. As the development of Christianity progresses, migration proves to be a constitutive factor. Today, more than half of the people in Germany with a transnational migration history are Christians. Promoting a sense of belonging and community under the signs of plurality and diversity is an ever more important task for churches. In the next step, the statement invites us to read the Bible as resonance chamber of migrants' experiences. Migration as a central theme of Christian faith, perspectives of biblical theological, chapter 4. In substantial parts, the Bible is migration literature. The migration experiences passed on from generation to generation are a vital source of biblical spirituality. They have found expressions in psalms and prayers, but also in norms of living together. Migration is a biblical place where faith and theological are shaped. Migration serves as a magnifying glass for society as a whole, rendering visible more clearly strengths and weaknesses. Seeing the world from the perspective of marginalized and excluded, the biblical texts enable insights that can be challenging, especially for people who themselves live in prosperity and security. In order to make adequate decisions in the fields of migration, one needs not only knowledge of facts, but also an ethical compass. On the basis of Christian social teaching, chapter 5 thus outlines some socio-ethical orientations. With measures to manage migration are necessary and responsible, and which are not. How are decisions taken on who may stay temporarily or permanently, and who has to leave? What are the consequences of certain decisions not only for the host society, but also for the migrant's country of origin? Important starting points to arrive at some guiding principle are again two biblical insights. The conviction that God created all people with equal dignity, and the commandment to love not only one's neighbor, but also one's stranger. No border can legitimize the disregard for human dignity and the denial of protection in the face of serious danger. When we look at the desperate situation of refugees in the Mediterranean, on the border with Belarus or in Balkan, this principle has a clear political significance. Furthermore, Christian social teaching upholds the principle of the universal destination of earthly goods. That is to say, the resources of creation are given to all people for their use. The right of a person to have access to essential goods take precedence for particular claims to ownership. Thus, any categorical limitation of a common good to the national or regional level would be an ethical problematic provincialism. Pointing beyond the current framework of international law, the joint statement formulates two ethical principles for a global migration order. The second presupposes the first. Nobody should be forced to immigrate from their homeland. And everyone should be able to immigrate to a new homeland. As a regulative ideal, this pair of principles can provide guidance for striking a just balance. The problem is not migration as such, but migration driven by violence or suffering, by war and armed conflicts, climate change, hunger, poverty, and lack of prospects. In view of the horrors of Ukraine war and of worsening climate crisis, these destructive dynamics become ever more evident. Unresolved global problems must not be carried out on the backs of refugees and migrants. The longest chapter of the joint statement deals with political and legal fields of action. Chapter 6. In doing so, it addresses four major areas. First of all, the chapter elaborates on ways in which states are bound by universal human rights. The political options of the democratically legitimized legislator are not insignificant, but find a limit when human rights standards and other norms of international law are affected. Next, the relationship between migration, development, and global justice is examined more closely. Contrary to what is sometimes suggested in political debates, development cooperation cannot be used as a simple means to reduce migration movement. Rather, the aim must be to create perspectives for people in their countries of origin and to allow for a right-based approach of migration. At the same time, the relevance of multilateral agreements and exchange forums is emphasized. For example, within the framework of the Global Compact for Migration or the Global Compact on Refugees. Thirdly, the chapter discusses asylum as a European policy field, acknowledging the fact that European Union has achieved a lot of past decades. The document assesses that on the path toward a common area of protection and solidarity, there have been some moments of deadlock or even steps backwards. A solidarity-based common asylum system that would do justice to the concern of refugees while guaranteeing a fair division of responsibility among member states is still not in sight. In the course of this evening, we will talk about this question in more detail. Already now, I would like to thank everyone taking part in this important debate. Last but not least, the chapter addresses questions of integration. The churches in Germany call for an approach of participation and recognition. Integration is a reciprocal process which may include difficult deliberations on legal, political and cultural norms. While differentiated access rules to the welfare state are politically permissive, they must not lead to relativizing human dignity. Furthermore, equal dignity in the long run must include a realistic option for equal participation in the political community. As a country of immigration, Germany should actively strive for a culture of naturalization. In the final chapter, a summary of important issues is presented in form of 15 C's. Church action in a migrant society, tasks and orientation. These self-commitments of the churches comprise the following points. Racism denies the God-given dignity of every human being. The churches remain dedicated to the ask of fighting all forms of xenophobia and enmity towards human beings. A religiously diverse society requires the protection of religious freedom for all and lively forms of interreligious dialogue. The Church's activities in this area need to be continued. The Churches strongly advocate for overcoming undignified working conditions of migrants. They stand up for the end of exploitation and human trafficking. Undocumented migrants also have a right to education and medical care. The Churches call for protection their human rights and for ways into legality. Furthermore, the Churches continue to promote and defend the rights of refugees and asylum seekers. These include the right to family reunification, the special protection of vulnerable groups, safe and legal access routes to Europe, effective sea rescue missions in the Mediterranean, the prevention of pushbacks at the external borders, and in general, the advocacy for a European refugee policy that is committed to human rights. Dealing with refugees and migrants in a human manner is a common task for the future, in Germany, Europe, and worldwide. The churches in Germany intend to participate in this effort with their joint migration statement, but above all through participle commitment together with partners from the realm of policy and civil society. Thank you for your very much attention.
Thank you very much. And now we move to the panel. And as I said, we had to adopt our program a little bit. The Protestant bishop fell ill, so now we swapped roles. My Catholic colleague, Dr. Kalbacik, will be the moderator of the session, and I will represent the Protestant position. So let's move on the panel.
I know you. Yeah. Where do you want to sit?
So, good evening. My name. Can you hear me? Is this working? No, it's not really working. Maybe overworking. Overworking. Yeah. Okay. No.
Yes.
It's working for a short moment.
You're very close to the...
Very close. Okay. So you can hear me. Wonderful. Yeah, my name is Alexander Kalbacik. As my colleague Katrin Hatzinger said, no, you're giving me signs, you don't hear anything. It sounds fun. Sounds fun. Maybe we change the swap. That doesn't work at all. Can we do it without mics? Do we need microphones? Or can you hear us without microphones?
Yeah.
Before we have funny sounds, we do it without microphones. Excellent.
Yeah.
Okay. So once again, a warm welcome also from my side. I'm responsible for migration affairs and interreligious dialogue at the Secretariat of the German Bishops' Conference in Bonn. And I think this is a very good sign of ecumenical cooperation because Katrin Hatzinger stepped in for the Protestant bishop and I stepped in for her. So this is how closely we collaborate. Yeah, it's a pleasure being here with you, especially because I had the privilege to serve as one of the two moderators of the ecumenical working group that drafted this migration statement. The Archbishop introduced the 7 chapters to you, and I'm very happy that we have the opportunity to talk about it in more detail now. I'm also very happy to introduce the participants of our first panel. First of all, Senior Church Counsel Oberkirchenrätin Katrin Hatzinger. She's a German lawyer specialized in EU law since 2003. She's been working here at the EKD Brussels office, first as a legal counselor, and then in 2008 she became the director of the office. Before that, she worked, among other things, as a journalist, and she's a long-standing member of the Commission on Migration and Integration of the EKD Council, the Protestant Church in Germany, and just this year she was appointed as a counselor to the new EKD Bishop Christian Stäblein, who unfortunately cannot be with us tonight. Then I welcome Mr. Franz Lamplmaier. He's the representative of the EU Commission tonight. advisor for migration management in the Directorate General for Migration and Home Affairs. He has a long working career in the Commission in a variety of fields, EU policies on migration, on asylum, maritime affairs, international relations, fisheries, internal market. And more recently, he's been working for the Taskforce on Migration Management on the island of Lesbos. I believe you're just about to go to Lesbos tomorrow.
Exactly.
So we're very grateful because he actually had to change his schedule to be here with us. And he's also coordinating the Commission's work on contingency planning in relation to migration flows following the Russian war against Ukraine. Very welcome to you as well.
Thank you.
And last but certainly not least, I'm very happy that we have as member of the European Parliament Tineke Strik from the Netherlands. She's been a member of the European Parliament for the Dutch Greens since 2019. Before that, from 2007 to 2019, she was a member of the Dutch Senate, the first chamber of the Netherlands. And during that period, she also represented the Dutch Parliament in the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, where she was active as a rapporteur for the Committee on Migration as well as the Committee on Legal Affairs. And she's a member of several committees in the Parliament, the Committee on Civil Liberties, Justice and Home Affairs. And there, that is important for our topic, she is the coordinator for the Greens and rapporteur on the recast of the Returns Directive. So, a very warm welcome to our three panelists. I would like to start with our host, Mrs. Hatzinger. Since you've read the migration statement, I will ask you a question about the migration statement. Won't be a test. In the introduction to the 6th chapter, which is the political and legal chapter of the statement, we find the following question. I quote, "How much is a European Union worth if not everyone is willing to play by its rules and if there is a visible lack of solidarity? And what follows from the joint commitment to human rights?" These are the questions which inspired this panel, which also give the maybe somewhat polemical title to our panel, "What is the added value of the European Union without real solidarity?" And I think this question is also highlighted by the current struggle we see between Italy and France about the distribution of people rescued at sea in the EU. So, taking all of that into account, in your view, Ms. Hatzinger, how can solidarity in the EU's asylum and migration policy be achieved?
Yeah, a big question, and actually, I mean, the migration statement is, of course, also close to me because as a member of our Committee on Migration and Integration, I also followed the ecumenical exchanges and debate, and I'm very happy that it's out. I also like the provocative title of the panel, because I think that provocation can be an eye-opener, and as it makes us think and puts a bit also the finger in the wound, because we have been discussing for many years now about fair distribution of solidarity and the fair responsibility sharing, and unfortunately, as we see, somehow we always have these déjà vus. We're a bit stuck in the situation. So therefore, I feel that the title of the panel immediately leads us to the core challenges of also the political debate around EU asylum and migration, which means, in my understanding, that without a sound agreement on the question of solidarity and a fair sharing of responsibility between the EU member states, there is actually no added value. So this is really what the EU has to achieve and what the Parliament, the Commission, and I guess all the member states are working for, and we as churches as well. Referring to the joint statement and the chapter this reflection comes from, I think there's a nice quote saying that migration is a place of learning for state and society. I think this is very true, and more than in almost any other policy field, asylum and migration policies reveal also the demands of the European Union because, again, a quote, states must surrender sovereignty or share it on an equal footing. They must demonstrate solidarity and show willingness to compromise. And actually this willingness is what is still needed today. And I also like to remind us all when we discuss solidarity, being a lawyer, that of course solidarity is also a principle which is enshrined in the European Treaty. So it's not only a promise made to each other, but it's something that is really a core principle of the funding treaties, always going together with a fair sharing of responsibility, and is laid down in Article 80 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union. I think as churches, we have always been advocating together with civil society that we also need to move away from this ad hoc approach on solidarity and this emergency-driven approach, what we again feel right now, to sound and sustainable mechanisms for the fair sharing of responsibility. And I guess member states are still in the process of realizing that only by ensuring solidarity, unity, respect for international obligations and human rights, these migratory challenges which will remain and might even increase again, they can be addressed in a sustainable way. I'm also happy that we have the opportunity tonight to come together, because our joint statement very much underlines our long-time ecumenical commitment for European asylum and migration policy based on human rights, justice and solidarity. And being here in this room, I would also like to highlight that we as Protestants and Catholics in Brussels, we have formed already years ago a so-called Christian group. And I said already, some of the colleagues being part of the group are here tonight. So several Christian churches, but also faith-based organizations like also Caritas Europe, the Jesuit Refugee Service or Eurodiaconia. We are working together to really accompany EU policy making and trying to contribute to sound solutions which are really also capable of carrying into the future. As Archbishop Heße has already highlighted, obviously there we always get to the points of high reception and procedural standards that are accepted and implemented by all EU member states, effective sea rescue operations at the EU external borders, support for non-European countries of first reception, agreements for solidarity-based sharing of responsibility, and safe and legal pathways. And I would say that in my opinion, looking also at the EU external borders, where you are an expert, we unfortunately are still getting quite regularly based reports of pushbacks or of even though there have been some improvements, I guess, on the Greek islands, but that there are still human rights violations going on. And I think if we want to put an end to these horrible situations, this is only possible if relocation is working in a fair way, and if the concerns of the host countries, but also of the refugees, which are unfortunately often forgotten, are taken into account. And therefore, I guess we will get to it later. I'm happy also that now the Czech presidency is trying to take a quite pragmatic approach on solidarity and really finally trying to achieve the debate. Last comment from my side here is that we as churches, we ask for a lot, we try to give orientation, but we also try to really live solidarity in our daily work, be it diaconical, obviously, in working on integration, in hosting refugees, but also in trying to create these so-called safe and legal pathways to the European Union. And there is one program where especially German churches are very much involved in, which is called Nest, Neustart im Team, which has now only been by our Minister of the Interior been prolonged and made stable, so to speak, where resettled people are hosted in a community which is quite often a community of faith communities, and especially where Syrian refugees have found a new home in Germany. And I think that we can also build on this solidarity in the churches and in civil society.
Thank you very much. Also, thank you for mentioning this good ecumenical cooperation. I think Neustart im Team is really a good example of ecumenical collaboration in the field of community sponsorship, which is still very much lacking in Germany, and we hope we can make some progress in this field. So, Mr. Lamplmaier, you've heard the long wish list. The Archbishop in his statement outlined several points. Mrs. Hatzinger now repeated or enforced some of these points. It's a very difficult situation we're in. The church statement is not only theory, I think it is also led by practice, but of course your perspective in the European Commission must at times be a very different perspective. In this statement, we call for a European refugee policy that is built on human rights, on justice and solidarity. And this means, you've heard it, high reception and procedural standards, safe and legal pathways, a solidarity-based sharing of responsibility, a permanent mechanism, not only ad hoc solutions, all of these things. And creating a legislative concept that would actually encompass all of these points seems to be more important than ever, but also more difficult than ever. So the question is, where do we stand now with regard to the concept of solidarity, with regard to the negotiations on the EU's pact on migration and asylum, and where do we stand with regard to what the Czech presidency suggested, this concept of adequate solidarity?
That's a very good question. Well, first of all, I would like to thank you for inviting us here and for this debate. I think it's a timely and important, very important discussion, and a very good setting also for it. The churches and the church-related organizations, first of all, of course, Caritas, but also others, I think we all know played, and the Archbishop has mentioned it also already in history, in recent history, but also now, are playing a very important role in the whole setup of migration policy and implementation of this policy, which is of course a complex endeavor. So yeah, solidarity, as has been said by Ms. Hatzinger already, is one of the core principles of our European Union, of course. It's enshrined in the treaties, and it's not only solidarity, it means not only solidarity on asylum and migration, but solidarity is needed in all policy fields that we share in the European Union, because without that the legal text is just cold letter. You need to implement it, and by implementing it, it's not only the letter that you have to implement, but also the spirit of the legal text. We all know also that we have an asylum and migration policy already in the EU, which is functioning to a certain extent, I would say, or let's say functioning from the view of the Commission, but no policy is functioning 100% fully without any problems. So we have common procedures for people who arrive and seek protection at the territory of the European Union. We have standards and norms for reception. We have this, common rules also on the status of beneficiaries. And we have an EU asylum agency which has been beefed up recently and is playing also a core role in supporting member states and migrants in the whole process. Of course, there are a number of issues. One is this fair share of responsibility or of burden. We call it in the past. I started as an interpreter in the European Union, and already then, which was not yet called the Union, we talked about burden sharing and so on. I interpreted in meetings about that already then, more than 20 years ago, and other things. But of course, the proposals for the pact, and Mr. Strik knows that, of course, very well, and thank you very much also for this extremely important work as a rapporteur for one of the texts, tries to give a response to these bottlenecks and stalemates that we have experienced as a union in the field of asylum and migration in the past, and we are unfortunately still experiencing. We have, I think, all seen that a mandatory scheme of sharing of quotas does not fly with the member states currently, and not in the past. So maybe at some day in the future it will. So that's why the Commission did not come up with such a mechanism. But I think there are a number of elements in the pact that are improvements, and my Commissioner, of course, and Vice President also seen us defended this also recently in the Council. council, because we are between two councils actually. We had the extraordinary council last Friday, and we have another one in 10 days. I don't want to go into the detail of the proposals. I think you know what's at stake, and I think the core point there is exactly this balance between solidarity and responsibility. I mean, everybody is underlining in favor of solidarity because, of course, but of course there are some member states practicing solidarity more than others. So we have to be realistic. There is no way around it. It will. Migration and asylum will always be a challenge. I hope we will be able to manage to find compromises during this mandate still. That's the big objective of certainly for the Commission. That's been underlined again. The previous presidency and the current one have made some considerable progress, I would say, which is light at the end of the tunnel. Now, I'm not sure if the Parliament shares this kind of optimism, but we will see. I just wanted to close by underlining also that we don't have only negative stories. I mean, we must also keep in mind all the time, and this is so important also for dealing with migration and asylum policy, that we have also a functioning system. To a large extent, it is functioning. We had almost 6 million asylum applications since 2015, and a lot of these applications worked without problems, led to giving the protection to the concerned person. Many of these people got also to the stage of integration. There are good success stories. I could bring several from even Greece, but certainly also in Germany, which played, of course, and we all know that, I think also an eminent role in the past 6 years, at least, or 7 years, and before, but of course we know that the thrust of these applications have been dealt with and were launched in Germany. Just to close, I mean, because also pointing a little bit to what I know best, of course, in my role in Lesbos, we had this really bad situation of the overcrowded camps on the external border, especially on Greek islands. Moria is very well known, but Samos, I went to Samos, and it was almost worse there because it was much closer still to the city. And we, after the fires in Moria, the Commission very quickly, Commission President together with the Greek Prime Minister, created this task force and intervened. And from day one, I can testify that in the temporary camp, first it was an emergency camp, then a temporary camp in Mytilene in Lesbos. We worked on improvements, on daily improvements, and within a span of a few months we managed to really fulfill the European standards, and within 8-9 months we managed to have no tents anymore in the camp. You remember probably also the pictures in October 2020 when 70 of the tents were flooded because there were over 1,000 tents and so on. So I think it's also important to see that the role and the action of the Union, because the Commission is not just the Commission, we are part of the Union, we're part of the institutions, and helped also by other institutions and by civil society, and for example churches. But the role is also to be fast and to implement and help where possible. I mean, we have to deal with what is possible. We cannot oblige a certain member state to build a huge building for 2,000 people in 3 days, like the Chinese did with COVID, for example. No? So there are the instruments that we use and we implement. It's probably not enough. Our agencies, also Frontex, also Europol, are playing a very important role in supporting member states. And we've seen it now again also with the big influx of people fleeing the Russian aggression in Ukraine. But we will always see and know, and we see it very well. I think that migration policy is a very politicized field, a very sensitive field, and there are implications which are not only the migrants and the rights of the migrants themselves, but there are implications at the border control, of course, of security. And it's not a pretext, it's not an excuse. Security must be taken seriously, of course. We have trafficking human beings, we have terror threats, and so on and so forth. Hybrid warfare, Belarus was mentioned also before. And you have, as a receiving member state, not only at the external borders, but all our member states who take on migrants, you have an issue of public order. You have to ensure that you have a reception and that your society on the spot is prepared to receive the stranger. Because in most cases, in the beginning, it is a stranger until you get to know this person. So solidarity can only be achieved, I think, and implemented and maintained if you get this acceptance of the local population. And I've seen it again in Lesbos. They came from a very, very open arms attitude of the people back in 2015 and 16 still. And then the numbers got higher and higher, and the systems were not able, due to many reasons, also to government, to other reasons, to get rid of this overcrowded situation. And after a few years, back in 2020, in February, it came to riots because the local population was so used and fed up, and it was easily also put into this situation where, because the riots did not really start with the local population, it was actually other forces intervening also, but still. I mean, it's just an example to keep in mind also that when we talk about asylum and migration policy, and of course I think we all want to get it right, and we need a good mechanism and a better legal system still, but we also have to keep in mind that it will not be possible without the people. And that's why the politicians are behaving like they are. I hand over to the politicians.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. That was a very broad overview, both of the challenges, the difficulties, but also the achievements and opportunities. You very diplomatically avoided to give us an assessment of the Czech proposal, but maybe we will talk about that later in more detail. But now turning to you, Tineke, Strik. The situation is difficult, and many people in Germany and other countries have the feeling that on the political level in Europe it's becoming even more difficult now. We have not only the Visegrad states that are somewhat critical of migration, we also now have the new governments in Sweden, in Italy. We have developments that sometimes make you wonder how can, under these circumstances, solidarity be achieved when it comes to refugees and migrants.
Yeah.
What is your take on that?
Yes.
As a politician, as member of the European Parliament.
First of all, also thanks a lot on my behalf for inviting me and for having this event. I think it's very worthwhile, and I really admire what the churches are doing, specifically the German churches. I'm a regular visitor of the Hohenheimer Tage für Ausländerrecht.
Oh, so we could have met there already.
We could have met there, maybe next time, who knows? And which is also unique in bringing all the actors together. We don't have that in the Netherlands, for instance, and I think it's inspiring many different actors, and it's really helping the cooperation. But having said that, the polarization indeed is very visible, and those changes of government make actually visible what's already happening, of course, for a longer time. And I think that we can say that in this term already the European Parliament is more polarized than it was the term before, where there was a good majority for, especially on solidarity, for having regulation that really would guarantee a fair responsibility sharing. And now it's difficult. It's much more difficult to get majority positions on these types of things. And maybe, if I may say, I also see the other way around, that politicians sometimes really ruin the social support, the public support, by spreading those images and narratives and threats that people, of course, get afraid of and act upon with resistance against refugees. So it's also a responsibility for politicians, I think, to be much more careful and have some leadership in telling why solidarity, responsibility is needed also worldwide, I would say, for all the refugees. But to your question, your position, actually, there's no added value. It's indeed provocative. I tend not to agree completely, because I think that during the 20 years we have managed, as my colleague also said, to have a good set of standards on paper, on reception, on rights, on procedures, etc., etc. But what I agree with is that these standards can only become effective if we have a fair responsibility sharing. And actually, I would not prefer to use the word solidarity, because that really, gives the impression of, okay, I want to help you. No, I think that we all have the same responsibility for asylum seekers that are coming at our borders. And this is the problem of the current system now, that it is shared in an unfair way. I mean, this first entry criteria, which we cannot get rid of to a certain is really ruining actually the possibilities for having a real common European asylum system. Because you see it very clearly, countries like Greece, Italy, everyone at the external borders perceives it as a very unfair system. And what do? They perform substandard. I mean, and it's working. I mean, the Greece reception system is completely, sorry to say, it's still not good. The procedures are not in place because people simply, most of them are rejected simply because they depart from Turkey and enter into Greece, and they get an inadmissibility of their request even though they cannot return to Turkey. People who want to ask for asylum get an appointment for a year after, and in the meantime they are irregular staying there, having the risk of being deported any moment back to Turkey. People are detained for much too long. So what is happening if people get a deportation order and they are staying there irregularly with the risk of being deported? They move forward. Of course they move forward. Or even if they get a status and they don't get any money, they don't get any housing, they move forward. So this is a kind of de facto relocation policies that the Greeks are organizing. And also, in order to make sure that this responsibility is not too big, they undertake systematic pushbacks at the border with a lot of violence. And so this is also showing, I mean, I cannot say I don't blame you for that because of a lack of solidarity, but it's showing what the impact may be of a lack of common trust and a lack of fair responsibility sharing. And what is now happening in Italy, we were afraid for that to happen again with this new regime, but it happens very quickly, I must say. And actually, you see that the Italian government is even not shying away from instrumentalizing people and people's lives in order to get cooperation from other countries. This is really to be condemned very fiercely, but at the same time we also know we cannot solve the problem without really making sure that we have this common responsibility. So I don't think that mandatory relocation is enough. We actually should have a new system of people being registered, being then distributed, looking at where do they have families, which language do they speak, and then having a kind of distribution where people really fit, where they can build a new future. And only then, of course, you have reasons to criticize member states who do not comply with the rules. Because now, indeed, no one wants to say anything about pushbacks by Greece, because Greece will say, okay, you have them, take them. So it makes it all so less credible. You know what I just heard a few weeks ago, a colleague of you from the Commission said in the Commission, no one is complying with the rules anymore. No one. So we need new rules. I don't think that's a logic reasoning. I don't think new rules will solve anything as long as these rules are not fair and as long as these rules are not enforced. Because it's really good, this Taskforce and so on, and I'm a big fan of dialogue, but you can only have an effective dialogue if you're also ready to enforce compliance. And now the member states really feel they enjoy impunity because nothing happens if they do not comply. So that has really made this policy so incredible, that it's affecting everyone's policies, and it has affected the the trust among the member states. So we need a fundamental change, a cultural change, but also start to give authority to rules, to what we adopt in legislation, make that alive again, and that's much more important than thinking of new rules. Now your last question on the Czech proposal, you may ask that to me as well. What I see actually is, I really want the Council to see working on AMMR. I really want them to make legislation. Because what I saw the French presidency coming up with a declaration on voluntary relocation, it's very permissive, and we've seen it up until now. There has not been so much of a relocation. It's outside of the legal framework, so the court cannot do anything with it. Parliament cannot do anything with it. It's a piece of paper that member states can decide to commit to or not. And they did that only in order to get the southern border states on board with screening and with Eurodac, so with the more restrictive measures. So I think that it's really high time to create a balance between restrictive security measures on the one hand and fair responsibility sharing. And what I see from the Council documents so far is that it's not going exactly that direction, but that there's a really readiness to accommodate member states for more flexibility. So that member states may even, still Greece and Italy, they keep the responsibility, but they are allowed to derogate from certain core standards. Like they can take more time for register asylum requests, they can detain people for a longer period, they can do the border procedure for everyone. These types of derogations are very far-reaching. So in the end, it's the refugees, it's the asylum seeker that has to pay for the lack of responsibility, and that should not be the direction.
So there is the danger that flexibility might actually mean a race to the bottom.
Yeah, exactly. So actually it moves away, this is my feeling, the whole idea of a common European asylum system moves away back to more intergovernmental, to more discretion for the member states, and then they can agree on a common system. But what is left then? Because then you have this race to the bottom. No country wants to be more attractive than another country. Yeah, that's the situation where we were in the 90s.
It's true. Well, thank you very much. Thank you also for mentioning this issue of credibility when it comes to pushbacks. It reminds me of a very interesting conversation, but also in a way a very sad conversation I once had with a Turkish journalist last year. He told me the difference between the Poles, the Greek, and the Turkish is the Turks, they do pushbacks at their eastern borders and they talk about it. The Greeks do pushbacks, but they don't talk about it. The Polish do pushbacks and they want to legitimize it by changing the law. And he said, this is the only difference between the three of us, and I think this should not be the standard to aim at. Yeah, so turning to you, Katrin Hatzinger. We have been diving now into EU politics. The churches, of course, contribute to shaping the debate. You already mentioned some examples of your work here. And now we are, in a way, under changed, talking about refugee and asylum policies under changed circumstances after February 2022, the large number of Ukrainian refugees. And we are somehow in a situation of ambiguity. On the one hand, we're very grateful, very happy that quick solutions have been found for the Ukrainian refugees at the European level, also at the national levels. But at the same time, we wonder, what does that mean for refugee and asylum policies in general? Why is it possible to have political will and also administrative capability to deal with the Ukrainian issue? It's not perfect, but I think we're dealing with it, we're coping with it quite well. And why are we stuck in a deadlock at times when it comes to European migration and asylum policies in general? What is the role of the churches to help overcome this deadlock?
Well, I think good examples and constructive approach is definitely needed. And to defend the Czech presidency, I think what I really like about their approach now, I mean, talking about adequate solidarity, that at least they were so clear to delete return sponsorship from the list of solidarity measures, because this was one proposal that came up by the European Commission when they presented the pact and the Migration and Asylum Management Regulation, which was supposed to replace the Dublin regulation, that they said, well, a form of solidarity can also be, if you don't want any refugee to be relocated to your country, that you help as a sponsor to return people. And this, of course, we felt was morally but also legally really very to be contested. And I mean, I think also with the Parliament we successfully did our advocacy job, that this was really not taken on board, and I think it's an episode of the past, luckily.
I think in English it sounds even too harmless.
Yeah.
Return sponsorship. When you say it in German, Abschiebungspartnerschaft, it's even worse, I think, because it brings together a very bad concept with a very beautiful, humane concept.
Yeah, the combination was odd, but words can sometimes also a bit hinder to see clear. But I think we made it clear that this was not the way forward. Talking about like a positive approach, I think what we also as churches here, as a Christian group, also try to do when seeing that finally the Temporary Protection Directive was activated, to turn this also into a sort of impulse for now the debate on the pact on asylum and migration, because we feel, even though there are still shortfalls and of course not everything is perfect, but I guess later on we will also hear about good examples of the integration of the Ukrainians who came from the field. I think it's still great that within very short time, unanimously all member states agreed that this directive was supposed to be activated, and this allowed really many hundred thousands of people to come to the European Union, to have access to education, to healthcare, to the labour market, and also to move rather freely around. And we seeing also, of course, the discrimination comparing to those who arrived in Europe in 2015, still we feel we want to build on this. And we would really very much hope that the examples and the practical work which is done on the ground will also trickle into the policy makers' minds, and making them see, hey, this is also working a different way around. And especially what you said, Tineke, is it's something we very much try to argue for when it comes to forms of solidarity, that the links of refugees to their to certain member states, be it by language, be it by qualification, be it by groups of fellow citizens, that these are really taken into account. So you cannot make a migration policy which is sound against also the wishes and the preferences to a certain extent to those migrants, those people at stake. And hopefully this will also happen with the examples from Ukrainian refugees. I would also like to highlight here, as it's not so long ago, we had just our EKD Church Synod. This is the meeting of our church parliament, and their EU migration policy is also always very high on the agenda. And there the Synod was also really very much underlining that the political negotiations on the pact should really be based now also on the positive experiences with the reception of Ukrainian refugees. And allow me also to come here with reference also to our first round of debate back to the disembarkation of people rescued at sea, because there is also some sign of hope, because in Germany the German government has really very recently agreed to allocate 2 million euros per year until 2026 to the alliance United for Rescue. And this is an alliance which is non-profit, an independent association that supports civilian sea rescue in the Mediterranean and really helps to save lives. And it's an ecumenical project funded by the Protestant Church in Germany in 2019. And I think there's a great recognition by significant EU member states for these civilian rescue efforts. And I hope also an appeal to reinstall also state-driven rescue missions, because of course also there the responsibility must be fulfilled, and this would really ease the situations of many.
But we have to admit it's controversial within the coalition government that the federal government actually granted these two
No, but in
benefits,
the
right?
budget committee, I looked it up, or even the opposition, members of the opposition parties, like voted for it. So
That's
the budget
interesting.
committee.
There were some polemics coming
Later
from
on,
one of the
yes.
coalition partners.
Yeah, I know, and the Bild Zeitung also made some comments, but they always do. So I think in the budget committee, which has the like power to decide, it was also the opposition politicians who agreed on it. So I think that's quite worthwhile noting. And as Mr. Lamplmaier, you are here from the Commission, I can't refrain from also referring now to the last council. You mentioned the extraordinary council last Friday. Because there again I have a déjà vu when it comes to the Commission trying to present like 20 points to follow in order to better coordinate disembarkation after the clash between Italy and France, but again also this idea to a certain degree to regulate civilian sea rescue missions, and this is something where we also have some rather bad memories of the old Italian government, because then regulation also meant in a way creating obstacles for those being active, and with no state rescue operation in place, I think we must be very careful that also the European Commission there remains an honest broker and is not maybe involuntarily contributing to more difficulties on the ground than necessary.
Well, thank you. Would you directly like to react to that, the contentious issue of sea and rescue?
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's the Commission's hands are tied there. I mean, we are not responsible. We have no competence on it as such. But of course, I think most people would agree that this is first and foremost a task for the member state, because this is a hoheitliche Aufgabe. It's a sovereign task for. So, and we should not have a situation where, because a member state is not able to fulfill this, an EU member state who is not the poorest member state either, and so on and so forth, to have a situation where then there's a situation which is not controlled, and which attracts then by that also more worse boats that are used by smugglers and so on and so forth. So first and foremost, of course, insist that this is done by the state and correctly, of course, not infringing on human rights and on international law, and then the law of the sea. But that said, of course, I mean, we cannot exclude that some things like that happen again. And for many other areas, as I said before in my initial statement, we are glad, and there's no other solution than civil society stepping in, because even in the reception systems, in the immigration task and so on and so forth, member states and even richer ones than Italy, for example, are not always able to cover all the ground. So yes, that's what I would say to that. And I'm not sure that we are already assisting in a race to the bottom. If I may go back one second to the Council proposals. I mean, yeah, the return partnership, I think that is also a child of its time, because we came out with it just in the autumn of 2020, and we had different political setup still then, and it seemed more difficult also because, I think it's sad that it's like that, but due to the current situation and the Russian aggression and this suffering from the Ukraine, for the Ukrainian people, there are many people in Europe who woke up to a different worldview and different roles of the European Union in the whole context. And I think, and this is my personal optimism again a little bit, that over time this will play. I mean, we have seen also in the past 20 years, we said before, Germany made a big role, but Germany was very long against any quota as well. Mm-hmm. So we must not forget this, and I think it's a learning process. Probably it will be difficult with the EU 27 to get really anytime soon, a mandatory quota system. But in the meantime, I think that there are many things that can be done, also even on the basis of the PACT proposals, amended and improved, hopefully also by the work in the co-legislator context and so on and so forth. for the situation with Ukraine, I think, yeah, this discussion, of course, is coming up again and again. But I think if another country had a similar situation, and we already had a contract, an agreement, a treaty with this country of some kind of association, giving the citizens of this country the same rights, it would have happened the same way. But it's simply that with other countries we didn't have that. And the second aspect, of course, and I think this is also an important aspect, that is not saying that other migrants or asylum seekers are citizens of second class in that context, but the aggression against Ukraine is an aggression also against the European Union, against the Western system of values that we all defend here. And this is very, very clearly so. So, of course, I mean, the fact that the attacks triggered such big movements was calculated by the aggressor. That's very, very clear. And it continues to be the case. I mean, so we must not be naive there, I think.
Thank you very much. Tineke, Strik, as you know, there's a political commitment, a political will to finalize the legislation in the new Asylum Pact by the end of this legislative term, 2024. The European Parliament is committed to that, the presidency. So my question would be, how optimistic are you this can be achieved? And what would be the consequences if once again the reform of the European asylum system fails?
Yeah, it's really glass half full or half empty. I don't know. I mean, what I just already said is that, you know, I'm really concerned that most of the progress in the Council is made on these security-related measures, and the biggest problem they have is with responsibility sharing and safeguards for asylum seekers. And I'm not sure if they will manage to overcome these problems in time. I mean, we have a joint roadmap with the Council. The Parliament still insists on adopting all the files at the same time. So not adopting first some security-related thing and then see what will happen with the other files. We think that's too risky, because there should be an incentive for member states who are reluctant to give in. But we said, okay, if we have this commitment from the Council, we can start the trilogues on positions that we are ready on. But we only have a very short time left, and we are very much aware if the Council doesn't doesn't achieve an agreement before summer next year, the pact is dead, I would say, because then we don't manage anymore. And of course then the political pressure, I realize, will be huge on political parties to still at least adopt something, but for now we are still united in saying, okay, but then we skip the whole thing. But let's see what will happen. May I say one thing?
Sure.
on the Temporary Protection Directive? Because I very much agree with you. It was the decision, it was great so rapidly and so with the unanimity, but it was very much in the realm of the aggression. It was a kind of position of solidarity with Ukraine against Russia, not specifically solidarity with the refugees itself. And you see a huge contradiction, of course, with what happened with the Afghan refugees only half a year before. I mean, we had a Taliban takeover in August, and then in October, the Justice and Home Affairs ministers adopted a declaration saying everyone should stay in the region. You know, we give money, and that's it. And they really negotiated on terms that would not lead to a kind of gesture that they could come to us. And what do we see now? I just come from a hearing in Droit on Afghanistan. It's the worst humanitarian situation, the worst human rights situation, and the world is silent because everyone is looking at Ukraine. And people in Pakistan, in Iran, they are not safe there either. I mean, they are working together with the Taliban. They don't get reception or protection. Erdogan is doing massive deportation back to Kabul. And it seems we are not talking about them. And so I'm not so optimistic that this, because actually I heard also politicians say, of course, yeah, this is our region. and the Afghans have to stay in their region. That region is responsible. And that still makes a distinction between refugees, and refugees cannot help in which region they have to flee. I mean, they are completely depending on that area. So I think it's high time to have a global responsibility sharing with the Global Refugee Fund, or I don't know how we can manage, but look a bit further than beyond our own neighborhood.
Well, thank you very much for reminding us of the fact that we should not play off one group against the other, because this is really what is happening at the moment.
Yeah.
What we're experiencing is when we look at Ukrainians and Afghans, Syrians, other groups coming from Africa, this is a huge danger.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. So my last question, I think we are already running out of time, which is very unfortunate, but at the same time it's a good sign, because it means there are still many things we could discuss on the basis of the migration statement, but also on the basis of our daily experiences, political developments, would be to you, Ms. Hatzinger. We've already talked a lot about solidarity, about a lack of solidarity. You mentioned, I think, that solidarity should not be the only term important here, but there is also some kind of right that the refugees have. It's not only solidarity among member states, but also a rights-based approach. But solidarity is, I think, essential to the European idea, to the European Union. So, very concretely, what can the churches do to make sure that solidarity is not weakened, not diminished among the 27 member states, but that it is actually strengthened? Because very often we experience, even though we as churches would like to be part of the solution, that we're also part of the problem. You also have church discourse in some European member states which would probably be quite different from the discourse that we just had here on our panel, where we almost all seem to agree on certain essentials. So what can we as churches do to bring about a change of perspective and more solidarity among the very different member states?
Well, I think this demands more than 3 minutes to answer. But I think it's again very much leading by example, and this is also, I think, what this endeavor of putting this very comprehensive joint statement together over a long process with different perspectives, as we learn, try to achieve to really aid it by example in practice, not only preaching out of the church body, but really also living up to the standards, and then not giving up, also creating for dialogue, as we try to do today, to bringing the different perspectives also among the different churches. I think Committee is a good example for that, the Commission for the Catholic Bishop Conferences in the European Union, and we as Protestants also try to do it bilaterally with our church partners, and then reminding also what is possible. And therefore I would like to get back to the Ukrainian example, because notwithstanding all the aspects you have mentioned, I think it's very good to see that there is openness, there is a generosity in society, this solidarity is possible if there is a political will. And I think just to highlight this can also maybe overcome the storm that we are facing.
Thank you very much. Looking at the clock, unfortunately, we will not be able to have questions now from the audience, but since we're a very small group, we will have a reception afterwards. And there will be the opportunity to continue this discussion, to ask questions, to have a fruitful exchange. And we will have a second panel now in which we can also continue this exchange on the questions we just discussed. But before we do so, before we go to the panel moderated by Thorsten Moritz, I would very much like to say thank you to the panelists for this very open, very fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.